We're lucky enough that our first speaker comes right here from Morningstar. He didn't have far to travel, just had to come downstairs. Our first speaker is Stephen Wendell. So Dr. Wendell is a behavioral scientist who studies financial behavior and how digital products can help individuals manage their money more effectively. He serves as head of behavioral science here at Morningstar and leads a team of behavioral scientists and practitioners to conduct original research on saving and investment behavior. He's also authored 2 books on behavioral science, one called Designing for Behavior Change and the other Improving Employee Behavior. And he's also founded the nonprofit Action Design Network, which educates the public on how to apply behavioral research to product development with monthly events in over 10 cities. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first speaker, Dr. Wendell.
Hey everybody, it's a pleasure to see you all today. As you mentioned, I'm Steve Wendell. I'd like to talk with you about goals-based investing, something I'm sure many of you are familiar with. In particular, what I want to talk about is goals-based investing from a behavioral science perspective. Who is familiar with behavioral science, behavioral science? Great. So for the people who aren't as familiar, behavioral scientists like myself, we study the quirks of the mind. In particular, we study why so often people say that they want to do one thing, for example, invest for the long term, follow a particular investment strategy until their retirement, and then have to do something very different, chase short-term returns, change their plans radically as the market hits a downturn, or if they hear some great stock hit and they decide to change their plans altogether. This is something that makes it very difficult for both financial planners, of course, working with these changing emotions and changing scenarios, as well as, of course, for the individual. We know that this is very difficult for the individual to really reach their goals if they're constantly changing. Isn't that exciting? So, no problem. So I think just setting up an issue with the live streaming, which is, as I mentioned, we're trying this out for the first time, so we wouldn't mind a little forbearance here. We want to make sure that we can include people who aren't in the room as well today. That's all right. I remember the talk, so I'm happy just to speak with you all about it. No problem. So in terms of goals-based investing, what I'd like to do is first talk about why goals-based investing is so important from a behavioral perspective. I know there's active discussion in the field on this approach and really what it means for the individual investor and their success. But from a behavioral perspective, it's actually quite straightforward. Now, that should be a little easier to follow. So what I'd like to do is first, as I mentioned, talk about why goals-based investing is such a good idea from a behavioral perspective. It really lines up with how our minds are wired, as you'll see shortly. But there are 2 challenges. And those challenges center, first, around whether people actually know their goals. You can guess, because of the title of the talk, what the answer to that is. But there are other challenges as well. When people do know their goals, do they know how much they need to save? Now, you may tell them, but is it real and vivid for them? Do they understand what that means? And there's some challenges there, and thankfully some techniques that you can use to help them. And then finally, even when we know what our goals are and how much they'll cost, are those actually, this is a bit abstract, are those the right goals for the individual? Do we know what in fact will make us happy? Do we know what will bring us the joy of what we've saved, of our saving and investing, really the promise of our investing and working with financial planners in the first place? And there's great literature in each of these different areas. And so what I want to do do people know their goals, how much they need to save, and money and happiness, is I want to share a little bit about the behavioral literature, why these are challenges, and then I want to give you practical tools that you can use as financial planners to help your clients do that. And so, as you'll quickly see, I'm a very informal person. Please feel free to ask questions. More importantly, share your experience. I'll make some pauses in the middle for those questions and comments, but raise it anytime you feel comfortable. And we can take it in this direction and just a wealth of literature that you can draw on and learn from here. And so I'll make sure that this is really serving your needs. Sound good? Is that a deal? Wonderful. Okay. So, to make behavioral science concrete, let me give just a simple example here. So there was a wonderful study, this was done with judges, who were granting parole. or more correctly, they were choosing whether to grant parole for individuals. And the researchers found this strange pattern over time. They found that parole rates for a given judge would go from, say, 60-70% all the way down to zero, and then shut back up again. 60-70%, and then shut down to zero, and back up again. Now, this happened over time, and it's very strange. Now, after time, they figured out what was going on. And I'd like to ask you, what do you think caused these judges to change their parole rates so radically? And if you're familiar with this particular study by Ganser,
Time of day?
time of day, great.
Election. Is this measured over years, or?
It's measured over time, I'll just leave it at that.
I'm gonna say one of the people they paroled committed another crime.
Okay, so people committing crimes, this is very common answer. So he said, perhaps one of the people committed crimes, the judge reacts and says, I really need to be much tougher on people, and then react, and then relaxes over time. In fact, I have friends in criminology, that is actually one of the mechanisms in play, just doesn't have to be here. I also heard election cycles, who was that? Great, thank you. So a similar idea, not that it's because of the judge's action, but because there's an external process that they're responding to. Also literature on that. Even though judges are supposed to be nonpartisan, and with both nonpartisan personally and brought into office in a nonpartisan way, we know that there are election effects. But they aren't this extreme. So what else? What else might cause that? Recidivism, okay? So they see a problem with people who are sort of paroled, they're doing fine, and then they go back into their old ways, right? And the judge thinks, what did I do? I can't have this. I can't have people out on the streets who are causing these problems. Right? And we can think of lots of different explanations of why this would happen. But rarely do we think of the reasons that actually cause this most extreme version. Now, I'll say again that the different comments that each of you made, they are true. Seasonal, nice. So seasonal affective disorder or simple or other effects that might occur with winter, summer, etc. I don't know the literature on that one. I do know about recidivism, election cycles, etc. So each of those are true, but none of them caused such an extreme pattern. What caused that extreme pattern was food. Yeah. So when I say behavioral sciences study the quirks of the mind, that's abstract. We don't quite get it. This is what we mean. Now, this is, of course, tremendously disturbing. It's disturbing because how could this be justice? That's the obvious way it's disturbing. What's more disturbing, however, more subtle, is that the judges had no idea this was going on. These are trained professionals who are literally making life and death decisions. Do people get out on parole, or do they stay in jail for the rest of their lives? Do you potentially put somebody out on the street who could re-offend? Life and death decisions, trained professionals, and a snack break change parole rates. Again, we'll come back to this lesson. The most terrifying part is that people had no idea this was going on. Tim Wilson, social psychologist from UVA, has a great phrase for this. We are strangers to ourselves. In much of our everyday behavior, we simply don't realize how much our environment affects us, how much small details of daily life. But when you understand those small details, as you'll see with goal-based investing, it is a tremendously powerful tool to help investors, help judges, etc. And so what our group does, part of the larger research community at Morningstar, is we run, not quite studies with judges, instead we run studies with investors. We run randomized control trials or experiments to better understand what actually moves the needle, what helps investors succeed, what helps industry professionals like yourselves better support investors and grow your business at the same time. We have a number of books under our belts. We have a series of white papers, but we also eat our own cooking, which means we apply this at Morningstar. You'll see it in our new financial planning software, which will be coming out soon. In AWS and Office, if you happen to use those, are modules around risk reactivity, or the likelihood that someone will panic in a market downturn, and what you can do to help that person. We use it, of course, in our own communications to help engage investors and understand what resonates with them. And so this literature that I'll be talking about comes from some from our own work, some from our advisory board. We work with academics around the country on these questions. and some just from the broader research community that we work with. And that broader research community has a very clear statement about goals-based investing, which is it is great. It's great because, well, when we think of the two different aspects of goals-based investing, right, there's the understanding the goals that the individual has, and then there's mapping those goals to particular investment options. It's really on the first part that behavioralists have a lot to say. I won't really talk about it, the mapping process to investment solutions. That's your expertise, right? You know that far better than I do. But I'd like to talk about the goals side. If we could turn that off, I'd appreciate it. So on the goals side, we all know that money is fungible everywhere in the world except in our minds. That's the problem. That as investors, as everyday people, we have a natural tendency to take money and say, okay, this dollar has a particular purpose. This is a dollar for my kid's education. This is a dollar for my retirement. This is a dollar for fun. And we are loath to use that money for a different purpose. Just imagine that you've just set aside $100, $1,000, whatever you like, for your kid's education, your nephews, whoever it might be. Just imagine that. Okay, you've set it aside. It's in a special account. And you've just seen a really cool tech gadget, right? Let's say it's the new Apple Watch. Let's say it's a gaming system for fun. You just want to have a little fun, relax, whatever it might be. Let's say it's a new boat. Are you going to take that money out of their education fund? Of course not. But if you have the same amount of money in your checking or savings account, is that okay? Yeah, of course it is. It feels different. It's still a dollar in either place. That's what we call mental accounting. Our minds naturally put money into different accounts by purpose. And so goals-based investing lines up with that. It says, okay, this is money for retirement, this is money for my house, this is money for charity, whatever it might be. Now again, I'm not saying anything about how you map these to investments. Underneath the hood, you may deal with them all as one pot. You may deal with them in an explicit bucketing strategy from investments. That doesn't matter. What matters is the presentation and how people think about it, and whether we align with what's natural. Another benefit of thinking about goals is this. So you need to save $1 million. You're going to have a wonderful house in this particular neighborhood near where you live. This is the color paint. This is what the neighbors are like. Which one of those is more motivating? Right. The vivid, the real, that which we can really see in our minds and work towards is far more motivating than an abstract number in study after study that we see. And so that's another reason why this is so powerful. And as we work towards that goal, having a clear goal with a number that's meaningful for us helps us do two things. One, it helps give us a feedback loop that says, well, $1 million, yeah, okay, maybe I'm at 100,000. Is that where I should be at this point? I don't know. My house, oh, wow, I can only afford 1/10 of my house. Okay, that's not right. It makes your current progress much more meaningful. It also allows you to do what's known as small wins in the literature. Yeah, I just saved my first month, or for somebody further on in their career, my 75th month, my 75th percentile of what I needed for this house, or for this charity goal, right? I feel good about that. It's hard to feel good about I've just saved 75% of $1 million. It doesn't feel the same. And so for all of these reasons, it's wonderful. And this is actually an example that we use. This comes from our Retirement Manager product, the new version that's recently come out, showing people those small wins and helping them visualize, in this case actually with an image that becomes more clear over time, what their goal looks like. And that is all wonderful and good if we actually know what people's goals are, which, as you guessed, we might not. So I could tell you all the literature about this, but instead, why don't we just do an exercise? I think we should be okay on time for that. What I'd like you to do is, on your computer, on your phone, if you happen to have a piece of paper, I'd like you to just quickly jot down 5 reasons why you invest. I assume as financial planners that you not only help others invest, but you invest and you save and invest yourselves, right? So just like you to quickly jot down the top 5 reasons why invest. Again, it can be on paper, computer, either way. Doesn't really matter. but it does matter that you actually write it out. And you'll see why shortly. And just look up when you've got it. And you don't have to write out full form. If you just want to write out a word that signifies each of those top 5 reasons, that's fine. Okay. It's a little hard to see if people are still going. Okay, it looks like people are still going. Okay. Those people got it? Just raise your hand if you're still doing it. Still writing it out. Okay. You seem to be in pretty good shape. So that's good. That's what comes to mind. Now, I've done this, other researchers have done this with many people over time. And we find that there are a range of different goals that people have. And so what I'd like you to do is just look at this list and just add any other ones that you might have been missing. Okay? And you could quickly jot them down. Order is not relevant here. Don't worry. It's just, what are some other reasons that you invest? And now I know the type is a little bit small here, so let me go ahead and read out some of them. You want to invest because you want to have an active retirement. You want to be able to go take vacations. You want to have fun. Perhaps because you want to have a low-key retirement, and you just want to spend time with your family. Right? Now, the key here is not just to write out what matters, but to feel it. To think about why you do this, to stop for a second and really dig deep and say, why do I care? Why do I do this? Is it because, for example, it's just fun? Many financial advisors that I meet and some financial planners also say, look, I invest not only because I love doing this for my client, I just love doing it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's an expression of who you are. Other expressions of why people invest are things like, I want to leave a legacy for my children. Perhaps your own children, perhaps nephews, nieces, whatever you might, other members of your family, or that you really believe in giving to charity. Perhaps because you have a strong religious sense, and you believe it's your duty to give back to your community or give back to your church. Perhaps because, well, you have kids or relatives for whom you want to pay for their education. You want to buy a new house. You just want to retire early. Or perhaps you want to switch. Financial planning is a meaningful and rewarding career. At some point later on in your life, you really would like to switch to something that, well, it doesn't pay well, but is another expression of who you are. And so I'd like you to just jot down any of these that are also reasons why you invest. Okay? Now, I should say that as financial planners, you may have already thought of a lot of these, okay, because you're an unusual group thinking about these questions all the time. And so we'll look at both how this works for you and I'll tell you about how this works for the overall population. Okay? Perhaps it's a matter of fear or just concern over future medical expenses and what that's going to mean. You don't know how much it's going to be, but you want to make sure that you're safe. For some people, they save and invest and plan for the future simply so that they don't have to worry about it, so that they know it's just taken care of. They're taken care of, their family's taken care of. It's not so much the details of what they spend on. It's just that sense of security that matters. Okay? And then for some people, it's political, either because they want to contribute to a nonprofit or political campaign or political cause that they strongly believe in. So I want you to feel those things you believe in and jot them down. Okay? All right? I think we've gone through the whole list here. Everybody good? Raise your hand. Okay. So now, what I'd like you to do is just put the numbers 1 through 5 across that combined list. Okay? Again, there was no order before. That's fine. Now we want to create an order. And I've added the list on the right just to make things a little easier for you. Some of them you'll see are truncated just to fit on the screen, but they're the same idea. Okay? So which ones are top? Is it donating to charity, retiring early, something you had on your list already, et cetera? Okay? And just do 1 to 5. What's your top? What's your second? What's your third? What's your fourth? What's your fifth? Et cetera. Thank you. All right. Is that enough time? You got your 1 through 5? Okay. Now, if you wouldn't mind, let me have a show of hands for who had their top goal, their number 1, that was not on their initial list. Anybody? Okay, that's fine. It's a group of financial planners. So we actually do have a few hands. I don't want to call people out. This isn't a matter of embarrassment. As you'll see, it's tremendously widespread. Who had one of the top 5 that wasn't on their initial list when you jotted it down? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Yeah, okay. A lot of people. A lot of people. Not quite as much as the overall population, for reasons that you'll see. But you're all financial planners. You're thoughtful. You think about this all the time, right? You help your clients with this. But yet, a fair number of people in this room, few didn't have their top goal listed. And they really thought about it and spent time with it. And a few, and quite a few, I'd say, looked like about 1/3 to 1/2 of the group, believe it or not, had missed one of their top 5 goals. Now, the initial study in this was by Bunn, Carlson, and Keeney, where they did it over time, which draws this effect out much more. It's difficult to do a 10-day study in one conference, but you get the idea. So they had people first write out what their top goals were, right? Then they had them select a few days later when there was no longer this sense of, well, I committed to this one being the first one. Oh, I can't really go back on that and add something else, right? So you didn't have this sense of internal consistency. People were just being honest. So they had select from the master list. And then much later, again, to remove this sense of, well, I have to be consistent even though it's not what I feel, then they had them prioritize. Now, one of the studies they did was with MBA students, asking them why they were in the program, why they were there right now doing it, why they were studying for the MBA. And what they found was that they doubled the number of goals selected. The ones that were missing from their first try were, on average, equally important. 1/3 of them missed their top goal. For what they were doing right there, for what they were going $100,000 in debt for at that moment. They simply didn't answer what their most important thing was when asked that simple question. And 80% missed one of their top 5. Now, as you'll see, we had a bit lower here, between about 1/3 and 1/2, but you do this all the time, right? And you ask exactly that question all the time. So they did another great study, Seagate. This is some of Keeney's initial work. So Seagate, hard drive manufacturer, used to be very big. I think they're still around. They did a study with the board members of Seagate, asking them what their company mission was, right? Now, this wasn't the already written down, right? They were going through a discovery exercise and asking, okay, you're on the board. We've been doing this for decades. Why are we here? What are we doing as Seagate? And they could only list about 1/3 of their own top priorities. This is not an isolated phenomenon. It happens even among financial planners asking the core financial planning question. MBA students asking the core MBA student question, why are you here? Why are you going in debt? Company executives. We see it across the board, and Keening has a long history of related work in this field dating from the 1990s to today. So why does this happen? It happens for 2 reasons. First, because, well, our minds are associative. We have all of the memories that we can remember, in our minds, all of our experience jumbled up in one place. And they're connected based on context, based on identity. So, and you can't have all of it active at one point. You're not thinking about all of your memories, all of your experiences at the same time. You can't. When you're at work, you're thinking, you remember your work experiences. You remember your work self, that identity. When you're at home, you're a subtly different person, sometimes radically so. When you're out with your friends, you're a subtly different person. And the reason is you're activating different parts of your memory and your experience. You simply can't have all of it top of mind, as we say. And so the challenge is, when I'm at work, I'm not thinking about my charitable giving self. When I'm with my friends, I'm not thinking about my deep goals for transforming the financial industry to care about investor behavior. These are different parts of my life, different parts of myself. And that's why people answer in that way. That's the first issue, is breadth. We don't have a way to sample across all of our selves, to use a very rough term. It's not quite cells, it's more selective activation in the brain, but you get the idea. The second is depth, is that we rarely, I should say, especially for things that seem easy, we rarely dig in and say, is this really true? Is this really right? And as behavioral scientists, we have the phrase, the easy is the enemy of the true. Because what comes to mind so easily is simply what we have thought of often in this context. And our minds conflate the things that are easy to remember with the things that are true. But if you're asking people to do something hard, like really think across all of their lives, all of the things they care about, what comes to mind easily is just what's relevant in that context, and it is not the full breadth. And so we have to stop, and we have to broaden, and we have to deepen in order to get this full understanding. And so how do you do this practically? Well, one of the techniques is the one that we just went through. It's called a master list. You ask people what is top of mind. You don't have them lock into it. And then you give them this list of, okay, here's what other people have thought of as well, right? Here are other things that people care about. You don't berate them. There's nothing wrong if they add things from that list. You do it in a very friendly way. But this is a very powerful technique to overcome this, okay? Second technique you can use, and this really comes from Keating's work, is to focus on those core values. Not to ask people why they invest, but to ask people who they are. What matters to them? Now, good financial planners, of course, do this already. In that conversation of getting to know the people and understanding what they care about and why they're in your office. But this is a technique to deepen. This is a technique to broaden, okay? And so what we do is we tap into those enduring parts of the self, and not just the particular facet that may have been top of mind because when they were coming over in the taxi, somebody cut them off, or they were slow in traffic and they just happened to be angry, and that means they're not thinking about other parts of their lives, right? The moment-by-moment context. You can overcome that by digging into their identity, what really matters to them, right? Another technique you can use, of course, and we did this in the abbreviated form, is to make sure the prioritization comes afterwards. You're not asking people to try and mix those two lists. Because again, it's not about gotcha. It's not about, hey, you forgot one. What were you thinking? But rather, doing it in a friendly way, doing it in a relaxed way that allows them to express their full selves, okay? So that's why the prioritization comes last. And as you do it, of course, and I've mentioned this in a couple different ways, you want to make sure that you don't lock people in. Because that search for breadth and depth goes against our consistency principle. That whatever we say, regardless how ridiculous it is, regardless how untrue it might be to our full selves, it's very uncomfortable to then say, well, you know, what I said 2 minutes ago was wrong. People don't like doing that. And so you want to lower the stakes. Say, let's just jot down the things that come easily to mind, for example. Okay, great. Here's some other things that folks have often talked about. Now, I want you to really dig in and say which ones are most important to you. That's keeping the lock-in till the end. And that's why in the study, of course, they did it over time. They did it over many days to show this in full effect. And I did the abbreviated version, and you can Here, you can do a somewhat longer version when working with your clients, okay? And so there's a nice write-up of this literature by in a book called Thinking Smarter. It's particularly focused on retirement, but it draws on this literature and it gives a nice package for thinking about it. That's by Shlomo Benartzi. You can find it out. Came out 2 years ago. So when people have a sense of what their goals are, and you've worked with them through this exercise, do they necessarily know how much is enough? Well, we know, of course, that they'll sometimes struggle. I'm sure you've had cases where you're working on the saving and investing plan for an individual, and you set a particular budget, and you come back a few months later, maybe a few days later, and that budget is out the window, right? Come across that? And so why does that happen? Well, one, people may not be telling you all the things that they're spending money on. Fine, that's usually, let's put that one aside. Two, because it's actually quite difficult for people to remember irregular expenses. So the things that people are very good at budgeting for are things like mortgage, car payment, kids' tuition, whatever it might be. What they're really bad at are things that are fully predictable but irregular, like the holidays. You're going to spend money on gifts. But that's only one time a year, right? I don't think, it's summertime. I'm not thinking about that, right? Or major medical expenses. At some point, you, your family member, they're going to have to go to the dentist. You don't know when, but you know it's going to be expensive, right? These are the things that we're very bad at because they don't have a simple pattern in our minds. And so we often label them in this mental accounting as, oh, those are one-offs. That won't occur again. Of course, the particular reason that they went to the dentist on that day won't occur again. But having to go back to the dentist, it's going to happen again. Or some other medical emergency might come up. And so one of the things, so that makes it very difficult for people to forecast what their expenses are, right? Another reason it's so difficult, and this one's particularly disturbing, is we're really bad at estimating bad things. So this is a study that shows the gap between what we believe happens bad things for everybody else and what happens to us. And it aligns roughly also to the actual occurrence. So very few people believe they will ever get divorced. And I'm sure you've seen cases of divorce. I'm sure you've seen some of the stats across our country. Half of marriages or so end up in divorce. Actually, I think it's more than that. Or very few people believe they'll be fired from a job, right? They think, no, that happens to other people. They're not good at their job. I am excellent. I will never be fired. And so what does this do? Yes? Sure. Yes. So this is the gap. What I'm trying to show here isn't so much that divorce and being fired is prevalent, but we are overconfident. This is a measure of our overconfidence. How much, so putting aside the facts of how often people are divorced, my understanding of how often other people are divorced relative to my rate. So it's purely a sense of overconfidence and not a question of the facts of, do I actually know the stats? That's what this measures. Pure overconfidence. People don't believe they will divorce, even if they believe other people will. People don't believe they'll be fired, even if they know other people will be fired. Does that answer your question? Cool. Did you have a question there? Nope. Okay, great. And so, well, that makes it rather difficult to plan if people don't accept that bad things will happen to them because they're human, right? Again, it's not a question of the stats. It's not a question of what the prevalence is across the U.S. This is a problem of overconfidence. People hear those stats, and they just don't believe it applies to them. Of course, it also becomes difficult because we don't think about the full consequences of our life changing over time. Sure, before we have kids, we have this small car, then we have to get the minivan, and then, oh man, not only are we paying for college, we're paying for the kids' car to go to college, and we're paying for the insurance, and then we have to fix the car after they crash it, etc., right? These are not things you usually plan for, at least not in the true amount that someone has to pay looking forward. And as our lives are changing, we also don't revisit these unless there's a clear trigger. Now, as financial planners, you are that trigger in many cases, right? That's why we have these meetings about meetings. Hey, has anything changed? Do we have to meet now? Has anything changed? Do we have to meet now? Right? They're often not thinking about it. They're not thinking because their financial plan, sadly, isn't that core sense of self that isn't a core part of their identity. It's a means to the things that they really care about. Taking care of their kids, leaving a legacy, whatever it might be. And so we have to create that trigger to overcome. Now, what do you do about this? Well, one of the things you do is you, and this is the problem with irregular expenses, you just show them the numbers and say, look, in general, people spend this much on housing. You knew that, you figured out what your house was, et cetera. But what they don't think about is how much they'll need for healthcare, because that's irregular, how much they'll need for dining out, for vacations, et cetera, because those are irregular, right? And so here's the stats. Here's what it looks like. And you, of course, don't necessarily want to use this graph. You want to use one for the particular age group, income profile, et cetera, of your individuals. But that helps ground the conversation and bring these out-of-mind entities, the irregular expenses, into mind, so you can think about them. Another thing you can do to help this overconfidence is to ask, so imagine 20 years in the future, 10 years in the future if it's someone who's approaching retirement. Imagine things have gone wonderfully. Tell me about your life. Tell me about your expenses then. Okay? Great. Imagine 10 years from now, 20 years from now, looking back, it's all gone wrong. It's all gone wrong. Family hasn't been there for you in the way that you'd hoped. Your job really didn't progress the way that you'd hoped. What are your expenses then? What do your finances look at that point, right? It's called prospective hindsight. Perspective in that you are looking forward to a future time, and hindsight in that you are bringing to mind all of the good and bad things that could have happened. And what that does is it brackets the range of possibility for the person. And so they can see, oh yeah, this glowing view that I have of myself, well, there might actually be another possibility as well, right? And so most people will end up somewhere, their natural version will probably be around here or around here. It depends on how people are wired, what their set point is, right? But with all people, if you give them this bookend, helps them give them a more concrete and real range from which to work from. And do you want to plan, which one do you want to plan for? Do you want to plan for the more conservative? Do you want to be irresponsible and plan for absolutely everything going right? Probably not. So it changes that conversation. It's one way to pop the overconfidence bubble that people feel. Okay? Another way is to, and this is particularly used in the retirement space, is to have people actually visualize that retirement, what I was starting to do over here when I talked about the house. So some people simply aren't wired to think about the future that much. We have fancy terms for it, temporal myopia, or we can just call it short-sighted. Fine. And so for those folks, you can help them think about the future by actually having them describe it in richness of detail. What are your neighbors like? What are their names? What are your kids doing at that time? What are you doing? Tell me your typical day. Tell me what is your best day in retirement? What are you doing? What do you eat? Just make it more real, make it more vivid, something that they would not naturally do, okay? And then, of course, we give triggers to reevaluate, to say what's really happened here. And if you're looking at their financials, looking at their statements change, et cetera, you can see if they've been, well, if they've worked through you for a withdrawal, or if there's been a major change in the budget, if you have access to that, et cetera. And you can use as a trigger to open up that conversation, because it's just not something people would naturally think of, right? And so next I want to talk a little bit about money and happiness, but I want to stop here and see if there are any questions about, well, the core focus of why people may not know their goals, and second, why they may not know it's enough. Yeah?
I'm intrigued with that last round of questioning about, imagine it hasn't gone so well.
Yeah.
I'm really having a hard time visualizing that conversation in actuality.
Sure. So we each have to use our own style and our own expertise, right, and knowledge of a particular client. But one way that I've looked at, that researchers look at, is to say, we want to plan for the range of possible futures, okay? Not saying this is going to happen to you, but it's good to be safe, right? It's good to think this through a little bit. Okay, so let's think about the best scenario. Let's think about the worst. right? There's a cultural metaphor where that's okay, right? Saying, okay, let's think about the best, let's think about the worst. That's something that they've been asked to do before, right? But, so that's one model you can use. But it'll depend on your particular client. It'll depend on kind of the relationship you have, on how you word it and how you phrase it. Does that help? You know, just the best, worst, and framing. I found that doesn't strike people as an unusual thing to do, right? Yes, and then yes.
So I think another way you could approach that is ask people what their parents' retirement had looked like.
Nice. Yes, that's great.
If it was particularly favorable,
yeah.
say, what if things don't work out that well?
Very nice.
Or if they got early on Alzheimer's or something really
yep.
negative, so things go off the rails like that. In your case, how would you?
Nice. So for those who didn't hear, he mentioned a great technique, just to ask, what does retirement look like for your parents? And what if it hadn't gone so well? So depersonalizing is a great one. There's another related technique that builds on what you're saying, which is to ask about other people, right? Or to ask their opinion. Either ask about other people who have done well or not, right? That's a little difficult because then those are other people and I'm, of course, better than them. There's no way that I would have a bad outcome. But rather you can ask their opinion as well and say, ask your friends, ask your colleagues, what do you think would be the best outcome for me, right, financially? What would you think would be the worst? And then grapple with that. You don't expect them to stay with those bookends. That's fine. But what you're doing is you're setting an anchor. You're setting a reference point that people will then adjust from. And it's a lot more realistic than where they would start. It's a great technique. Thank you. Yes?
I was going to say, if it's appropriate to say, anyone where this has done really well,
yeah.
And what does that look like? And where anyone where this has not gone well, where they've had negative
right.
surprises, what does that look like? The reasonable step is not either of those.
Right.
But
so she mentioned asking about whether you know somebody things have gone really well and someone who hasn't. And you added something that actually solves my earlier problem. It was great. You said where things just haven't, I remember you said things haven't turned out or things didn't.
as they expected.
Right, as they expected. So when you bring in that element of luck, and it's not about that person being different and you can explain away the fact that they didn't do as well, but where things just didn't turn out for them, then it can be more relatable because people just have bad luck sometimes. Right? That's great. That's great. Other questions? Or should we talk about money and happiness? Okay, great. So money and happiness. As financial planners, as advisors, as professionals in the industry, we want to help people reach their goals. No question. Right? And we understand that sometimes we need to help them bring all of those goals to the fore, not change them, but just make sure that they're top of mind and they can think about them in a careful and stable way. We know that there are challenges in figuring out how much people are actually going to need and making it real for them. There's another challenge that we don't talk about as much. But when I talk to individual advisors of individual financial planners, there's always that current in their work of helping people live a good life. And we think, of course, that just meeting their goals is going to help them live the good life. And that's certainly a big part of it. But there's more we can do as well. It doesn't have to be a big part of your practice, but I just wanted to introduce you to this literature. It's a little bit different than the first two areas. So let's start off with a simple example here. And I'd like to know, which one of these two jobs would you choose? Would you choose one that pays $100,000 or one that pays $105,000? Right? Most people want the one that pays more. Okay? Even if some other people are earning more or less, right? And that's what we see. That's wrong. We see that only 16% of people, this was in one of the early studies by pioneers in the field, Tversky, we see that most people say, yeah, I really want the one, I want more money. That's fine. And only a small portion, 16%, say, I want the one that's going to pay less. But then, if you ask people, which one is going to make you happier? Which one is going to give you more satisfaction? What do you think your clients would say? Would their answer be the same? Now, I don't know, of course, your particular clients, but in general, people know that, well, keeping up with the Joneses is a real thing. knowing that you're doing better than others feels good. It's not just about the finances. And so what's particularly troubling here is not that people want to show up their neighbors, we know that, but rather that they take the one that they know will actually make them less happy. Think about that. So it's not a question of information. It's not a question of kind of self-knowledge here. When you ask them which one will make you happier, they answer truthfully. But when they actually take action, they say, nope, I want the one that's going to give me more money. Now, what's particularly interesting is that, separate from this study, there are lots of studies on the relationship between income and happiness. And in the US, above around $75,000 per year, an extra dollar isn't going to help you be happier at all. Sorry. It has almost no impact whatsoever, income overall has almost no impact whatsoever on a person's happiness. Now, we see this in studies in the US, it's about $75,000, but we see this around the world. We've seen this for decades. And there's a question about why that happens. And one of the main reasons that researchers believe is that, well, below 75, it's hard to ignore the fact that there are many people who are doing better than you, right? Now, after you get, especially below the median, below about 50, you get to 30, 20, et cetera, then people really are struggling, right? And there are reasons, there are structural reasons why they wouldn't be as happy. But above 75, think about this. When you look around at, you can think about it for yourself, you can think about it for your clients, at the houses in your neighborhood, which ones do you notice? The best ones or the worst ones? When you look around at the cars, which ones do you notice? The best cars or the real beaters? Because if we're in a realm, if we're living in a neighborhood that $75,000 affords us in the US, we have a horrible tendency to always compare up, to always do this, to always take the job that will give us a little bit more, but then we are surrounded by people who are doing even better. Not even on average, but we just selectively find all those people who are doing better than us. And it makes us unhappy. It means that money, it breaks the relationship between what we could buy and our actual happiness. Now, so what do we do about this? Obviously, one of them is to compare down. And so your eyes would first go to that convertible. Your eyes would go to that premium SUV. Well, maybe not the SUV. Certainly not the minivan, but let's go with the convertible or the luxury car, right? But instead, as you're driving along, for like, wow, yeah, I know my car recently got hit in the side, which it did actually, and I've got this horrible dent, and I really should get that fixed, but I'm not doing that bad. Okay, great. Or when you're looking at the houses, I live in Oak Park, and we bought the best house we could afford, which meant it was beat up, and there were actually people selling drugs from the house beforehand, and we had to clean all of that up. I wouldn't actually show my wife the house until the disaster crew had gone through it. And Oak Park is full of mansions. Ours is not, let me tell you. And so what I'm trying to do myself is I'm trying to look at the trees. The trees are beautiful, and our trees are beautiful, and they don't inspire envy. But if I look at the houses, sure, there are actually lots of houses in Oak Park which are worse than ours, especially after we cleaned it up. But those aren't the ones that I see. I see the grand ones. I see the ones that are going for $2 million, et cetera, that are just crazy. Now, we actually do this with our kids as well. So I grew up in Maryland, and in a nice, comfortable suburban life in Maryland, right outside DC. And my parents bought an old farmhouse, 1800s falling apart farmhouse in West Virginia. And they took us out there every weekend because they wanted us to see a different life. Not to pity people, not to say, wow, these people are poorer than us, but to see the range of the truth, to see the range of how people live. My father grew up and was born in Butte, Montana. He saw that range. Traveled around the world. His father was in the military, and he saw that range. And we're doing the same now with our kids as well. It's not a matter of saying, look, you are so wonderful, you are so wealthy, but rather to feel the blessings that we have and still strive. There's nothing wrong with ambition. But to reset our comparison group to make sure that there's always someone on either side of us. So we're not always comparing up. We're not always feeling, my God, what if I could just afford this better house? What if I could afford this better car? Now, there's great research, in particular, Michael Norton and Elizabeth Dunn at Harvard have a book called Happy Money that talks about this body of research. And one of the best things that we can encourage clients to do, and ourselves, is to buy experiences. We think that buying a car, buying a house, buying a new sofa, et cetera, will, hey, this is beautiful, it's leather, it's plush, I love it, is going to make us happy. And study after study shows that's not the case. You get a short-term bump, and then you're back to normal. Why? Excuse the pun. It's because they literally become part of the furniture, right? Because they become part of the everyday. You don't remember the everyday. Instead, you remember the unusual. You remember your experiences. You remember the trip you took with your family and the rental car you had where you drove around Hawaii and had a wonderful time screaming out the windows, rather than the exact same car that you bought for yourself and you got stuck in traffic in every day. That's what we remember. And related, we are happier when we spend time with others. Not the people sitting in traffic, with our friends, with our colleagues, with people doing meaningful or fun things, right? Whether that is charity work, whether that's just hanging out with your friends. And so, don't buy the huge TV to put in your bedroom and just sit there and watch it. Instead, buy the huge TV and put it in your game room and bring over friends and have a good time with it, right? Same purchase, same amount of money. Very different effect on one's happiness over time. And related to that buying experiences, the things that we do every day that we love, our latte, special form latte, whatever it might be, our trip, our particular stroll, the more that we can break our habits of doing that and make it irregular, the more that it is a treat, the more that we remember it, the more that we enjoy it. Because everything fades to the background. If you had this beautiful dessert, and then you had it again and again and again and again every day, you just won't enjoy it. If you have it, and then you have a different beautiful dessert, and you go back and you have this one, then you feel it again. You taste it. Our taste actually adjusts in the same way, right? We call it the hedonic treadmill. We are always on this treadmill, no matter how fast it's moving, no matter how much money we're spending. We always are about at the same point because we get used to things. And so the secret to happiness in this case is you make it hard to get used to the good things you have in life. You focus on them, you make them special, you make them a treat, you buy experiences that are different and unique. Another way is to give to others, pro-social giving. Shown again and again. That makes people happy. For some people, that's charity work. For some people, it is direct service work. For some people, it's giving to your family and supporting them. Whatever it might be. It's different per person. And as I mentioned, there's great research on this. One of the best summaries is Dunn and Norton's book, Happy Money. Diener is one of the long-standing researchers in this field, also has a great book about this that you can check out. And so let me just quickly wrap up that as we think about goals, as we think about working with clients about their goals, we have this assumption that people are constantly thinking about their goals, that they have them ready in mind and can just tell you when you ask, that they realistically estimate what's going to happen to them and therefore how much things will cost, and that they're somehow maximizing the value they get from their money. And what's true isn't quite the same. Instead, it's not that people don't know their goals per se, it's that they don't have all of them in mind at a particular moment. It's not that people are stupid, it's that people are human. And it is very difficult for us to think about the costs because they're irregular, or because we're overconfident, or because it's in the future and it hasn't happened yet. How could I know what the medical expenses will be? And again, we simply don't know what will make us happy, right? Thankfully, we have lots of tools that can help you. On the first part, master lists, to help bring in the broader scope, to get that breadth. We can bookend the future with prospective hindsight to help burst that overconfidence. Not in a bad way, but in a friendly way that people can see, oh, well, there's actually a range of possible outcomes here. Which one do I want to plan for? Rational people plan for both, right? And we can make sure that we are really getting the most out of our money, and that the clients are getting the most out of their money, and that they know that you are helping them not only reach their financial targets, but reaching their life targets, succeeding in their lives, so that they enjoy it, so that they're happy, so that they're glad for the relationship they have with you. And with that, I have some strange thing in the way, but you can see that I'm literally all ears. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Okay? Please. And I think we have a few minutes. Yeah, actually about 10 minutes for questions, or we can end a little bit early for break. Yes, let's go here and then here. Yeah.
I love goal-based, all over that.
Right.
We do have a challenge when we get into what we say the softer side, and
Yeah.
we have examples of what your goals might look like. But sometimes people are reluctant to, even select active lifestyle or giving to others or less stress or whatever the picture of their future looks like. Need good broad-based questions to get them going on that?
Sure. Two different routes. One of which is to show that it's normal, right? This isn't about them. This is a survey of common things that people have, right? So, and there are many techniques in the field that are really about this social proof, right? Showing that something is normal, right? These are perfectly normal. This is what the broad population says. Any of these relevant for you? You don't have to show me, right? Just pick which ones are relevant for you, and then we'll look at which ones are most important afterwards, right? So that's one. Another is to do an identity appeal. So if you find with a particular person that it's just not natural to say, I want an active lifestyle, say, which one of these are you? Are you an active, fit person? Are you a strong churchgoer? Are you a proud parent? Does that feel different? Yeah. And so it'll depend on the particular person, right? But that's another technique you can use. Okay. Back there. Yeah. Sorry, did that answer your question? The best I could? Great. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a general question.
Yes.
Go back to the baby generation, particularly the last years.
Sure.
Because of technology, the way it's changed the last 5 years. Do you feel that, I have these studies so relevant. Don't you feel that instead of outside in, that we can look inside, perhaps the generation today, that we look inside out and these parameters,
Sure.
Maybe it's not the same, but I think it's a whole different.
Sure. So he was asking, just to repeat the question, about whether there's generational differences. Nope. Okay.
That generation. People under 30 right now.
Okay. So whether current millennials are different than all other generations, right? Perhaps. I would say that the list of goals, right, if you're doing a master list approach, sure, draw it from other millennials, okay? I think that is these are culturally determined in part, and so you do want to align with the particular experience the person's having, right? But when it comes to overconfidence, when it comes to not knowing what makes us happy, sadly, that's pretty much universal. Yeah, that doesn't seem to have a strong generational component, with the exception that as people age, their ability to attune to what makes them happy and their set point, what their natural happiness level, that does change with time. So it would actually be the reverse of what you're saying in that case. That older folks would be a little bit easier on that last part than millennials right now. So, from my understanding in the literature. Other questions? Yeah.
So, one of the number one questions I get, well, how do I compare to others?
Sure.
Right. That's
oh yeah.
Invariably. So, and then it's the balanced approach. We're trying to get them to 5 tips. What are some ideas and strategies? Saying, well,
okay, so in terms of the comparing, there are many ways, of course, that question can go. Are you talking about in terms of just aggregate wealth?
Yeah,
sure. So there are a couple different things you can do here. Saying don't worry about it, I don't think that'll help much. So, and the reason is, as behavioral scientists, I think you'll see here, none of the techniques that we work on are about changing people. People are people. This is how we're wired. We can't change human nature. Instead, we cleverly work with how people are wired. And so how am I doing relative to my peers, right? How am I doing relative to other clients? Well, great. No problem. If you have a diverse client base, for example, and some of them are in the multi-million earning right now, right, and some of them are in the mid six figures, and some of them are on the lower end, don't compare them all as one group. You're just going to make all those folks unhappy. So instead, you set the right reference point for that group and say, well, okay, for people like you, this is what we see. Right? And what you find, and this has been done in voting, this has been done in energy usage. Actually, if you have a ComEd bill, you've probably seen them do this, where they compare you versus your neighbors and your efficient neighbors. What they're doing behind the scenes is they're setting a reference group that's relevant to you and not doing the whole population, right? And so you say, well, okay, for people who are in similar income, family style, et cetera, you're about average, right? Or you're at this point. And then that removes some of the hugeness, right, the huge difference. Another way is to talk about the particular, to say, yep, so this is the average, but you know, a lot of these folks, they have these other obligations, or they have these other, et cetera, right? And so you answer the question, but you break apart that norm into the particular and say, well, what are your, you know, what group do you compare yourself to? Right. Instead. Other questions? Wonderful. All right. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it or learned something from it, or both. And I look forward to the rest of the conference today with you.